With all the news coming out of Minneapolis, something that hasn't received much attention is demand by Attorney General Pam Bondi for Minnesota's voting rolls. In a letter to Governor Tim Waltz, Bondi wrote, in order to return law and order to the state, that Minnesota officials must turn over the personal information of those who cast ballots in the state's elections. One Democratic official in Minnesota called it, quote, an outrageous attempt to coerce Minnesota into giving the federal government private data on millions of U.S. citizens. Yinka Oyatade reports.
A growing showdown between state power and Washington is unfolding in Minnesota. A new flashpoint, Attorney General Pam Bondi demanding state authorities hand over Minnesota's voter list in a letter sent directly to Governor Tim Waltz. Bondi is also insisting the state turn over data on people receiving public assistance and repeal sanctuary city policies, arguing those moves would help bring back law and order to Minnesota and improve the lives of Americans. Many disagree, some critics suggesting President Donald Trump wants access to the data to interfere with the upcoming midterm elections. State officials like Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison say Bondi is trying to force Minnesota to give up sensitive voter information that the Justice Department is not entitled to have.
Pam Bondi letter, it kind of reveals what this is all about. This is not about fraud, and it's not even about immigration, and it's certainly not about law enforcement. It's about handing over documents of the state of Minnesota, private information, including voting information, to the federal government. That's what this is about. And that's why we're fighting it.
It's still not clear what Bondi plans to do with the voter list if the state complies. Experts say the Justice Department could share the data with Homeland Security, allowing officials to identify non-American citizens on voter rolls. But election oversight does not fall under Washington's control. The U.S. Constitution gives that power to the states. Minnesota is now one of nearly 24 states the Justice Department is suing for its full, unredacted voter lists, and the courts are already weighing in. On Tuesday, a federal judge in Oregon dismissed a similar push to obtain the state's voter data, ruling the government didn't meet the legal standard to access it.
And for more on this story, I'm joined by Nadine Strossen, professor of constitutional law in New York Law School and former president of the ACLU. Thanks so much for joining us here on France 24. The Trump administration made this demand of at least 44 states. Many of those states have refused to comply and have since been sued by the Justice Department. But let's just take a step back for a moment. What motive does Pam Bondi have for asking for these voting rolls? The White House says this is about making sure that immigrants without legal status don't vote in elections.
I certainly can't say what is going on in her mind, but I can talk about what use or abuse such insensitive private data could be put to. And it definitely could be used to intimidate people who are lawfully entitled to vote, just as the administration has been intimidating even naturalized American citizens and native-born American citizens in an excessive zeal to look for what they said they were targeting, namely unauthorized aliens who are committing crimes.
Let's talk more about that because, Donald Trump was already impeached for trying to overturn the results of the 2020 election, which to this day he falsely claims that he won. In your opinion, by trying to obtain these voting rolls, is the Trump administration setting up a situation where they can contest the results of the midterm elections that are set to take place in November?
I think that is a very likely motivation. The fact that Donald Trump made unsubstantiated claims without any evidence that he had won, which led to the impeachment, as you rightly say, would give him a strong motivation to seek to back up his claims. And as I said, even worse, to intimidate people from exercising their right to vote. This is a big struggle for power, not only between individual liberty and government power in general, but between the federal government and the state government, which, here in our 250th anniversary year, of the Declaration of Independence, it's really important to recognize how important what we call federalism, the division of power between state and national governments, are. And ironically, it has traditionally been conservatives and Republicans who are most protective of state power and most resistant to over abuses of national government power. As your excellent introductory piece pointed out, it is the states, not the federal government, that have power over elections.
Now, so the Trump administration, has been pretty strategic in sending federal troops into Democratic cities, Washington, D.C., Chicago, Portland, Minneapolis. And in 2020, Donald Trump and his advisors actively explored plans to seize voting machines. That didn't happen, but do you think that could happen in the midterms or in the next presidential election?
Sadly, one hates to speculate, but even after just a year and a few days into the second Trump administration, I sadly cannot rule anything out. Actions by the federal government that a week ago, would have seemed unthinkable have been happening. Even after the first killing of a citizen who was exercising the sacrosanct First Amendment right to protest, many people said, well, tragedies happen. But the second time, I think a lot of people are recognizing that what we are seeing is a frightening pattern of abuses. If life can be treated as, something that can be sacrificed to political ends, certainly voting machines can as well.
Give me the worst case scenario here. I mean, what I'm getting at is what Democrats fear. What could happen here? I know you don't want to speculate, but how high are the stakes here?
The stakes are very high because I think this is a president, and I'm truly saying this as a nonpartisan observation. I really want to underscore that important Republican, conservative, political leaders and journalists and others are engaging in these critiques, including people who previously have been completely defensive of the president and have defended everything he has done, are now breaking ranks and saying this is going too far. The pattern that we see here is somebody who is obsessed with his own power, with remaining in power, and the Constitution be damned, individual human life and safety be damned, and even principles that he supposedly supported, such as the right to bear arms and federalism, be damned. And the reason I say the right to bear arms is one of the alleged justifications that was put forward for killing Alex Petty was that he had a handgun, and yet that handgun was lawfully permitted. So I think this is a president who will let nothing stand in the way of his power. And the only reason that we see him starting to make concessions now is that he is afraid that he is losing power through his overtly abusive tactics and has to rein them in.
We have about a minute left, but I want to bring this back to that threat that Pam Bondi is making to Minnesota, because this is currently the source of lawsuits. It's possible the courts could rule against the administration. So could Bondi's threat to, turn over these voting rolls or else be seen as a way of bypassing the courts?
I think that the courts will continue to do an excellent job. It is no coincidence that the judge who was highlighted in your excellent introductory piece characterizes the fact that judges all over the country, including judges who were appointed by Republicans who are deeply conservative in their values, are still ruling against the administration when it is acting in an unconstitutional way. I am very confident that the courts will fulfill their special responsibility to buck majoritarian political pressures and defend the Constitution.
Okay, we'll end on that note of optimism. Nadine Strossen, professor of constitutional law, New York Law School, and former president of the ACLU. Thanks so much for joining us here on France 24.
Thank you for having me.